And they're going to be doing 2 days worth of workshops with professionals all throughout Los Angeles, talking about all different kinds of public relations, introducing you to the profession, and helping you with your professional development. And so any of you who are interested, I'd encourage you to attend. You can either see Rhoda Weiss, who is the National PRSA board member, as well as Joanne Killeen, who's the former National PRSA president, who will be able to help you out and give you any information if you'd be interested in attending the conference this weekend. So thank you.
Sarah, if you had not tooted your own horn, I was about to toot it for you. I do think it's an amazing achievement that Sarah and Darren won this award. Two of the first four to get it. Darren, we're very proud of Darren. At this point in his career, and he's just about finished with his time with us, has a perfect 4.0 average. So, Darren, congratulations doubly for all of that. A lot of exciting things have happened here at the Annenberg School in recent years. A lot of exciting things have happened in the public relations program. There are a number of faculty members here. I think you all probably remember Bill Faith, who's here, great professor of this program for many years. Jen Floto, a leading professional and who's helped so much to build this program. Ian Mitroff, who is also a member of the Marshall School faculty and who's done so much to build the Strategic Public Relations program. And to introduce and to moderate tonight's program, somebody who's really done remarkable work here, a great public relations professional, as you all know, and a great academic leader who actually built the new Strategic Public Relations program that we have, the graduate program, which has become, we think, in many ways the most important in the country, and who has done so much for this school, Professor Jerry Swerling.
Thank you, Jeff. Good evening. It's great to see all of you here. You could all be home watching CNN instead and finding out what's happening on the international front, but instead you decided to come here for the next best thing to Monday Night Football, I guess. Good to have you all here. This is going to be a pretty interesting discussion, we think. Let me describe to you the game plan for the evening, if you will. Our featured speaker will first speak for about 30 or 35 minutes. And we'll then have three panelists come up and join him on stage. Each of the panelists will make comments lasting about 5 to 7 minutes. And then they will exchange remarks on each other's comments, and then we'll go to questions and answers. So there'll be ample opportunity, believe me, for all of you to ask questions of our really impressive panel tonight. And now it is indeed my great pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, a man who clearly has both the courage and the convictions to take a stand, Dr. Jeffrey Wigand. Let me tell you a little bit about him. A native New Yorker, Dr. Wigand was born in New York City, but now calls Charleston, South Carolina home. He earned academic degrees with distinction from the University of Buffalo School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, and more recently obtained a master's degree in secondary education, an MAT, from the University of Louisville. Quite an interesting transition. Dr. Wigand taught Japanese and science, biology, chem, and physical sciences at DuPont Manual High School, a national school of academic excellence in Louisville, for 3 years, and received national recognition. This is pretty special. National recognition for his teaching skills when he was awarded the Sallie Mae First Class Teacher of the Year in 1996, and he was one of only 51 teachers so recognized nationally. Dr. Wigand has always been a teacher, but not always in the classroom. He held senior management positions with a number of leading healthcare companies, including Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer, and then served as vice president for research and development for Brown & Williamson Tobacco from December 1998 to March 1993. After a separation from Brown & Williamson, Dr. Wigand cooperated with governmental agencies investigating the tobacco industry. Dr. Kessler, the former commissioner of the FDA, has acknowledged that Dr. Wigand's assistance was central to the FDA's investigation into the role and effects of nicotine in tobacco products. Dr. Wigand received national prominence in 1995 when he became the tobacco industry's highest-ranking former executive to address public health and smoking issues. He made the truth known to the public about the industry's disregard for health and safety during an interview with 60 Minutes, and during a deposition he was compelled to give in action against the tobacco companies. Dr. Wigand was sued by Brown & Williamson because of his public disclosures about the industry's efforts to minimize the health and safety issues of tobacco use. Louisville-based Brown & Williamson is owned by BAT Industries, by the way, and BAT is the world's second largest tobacco concern. The lawsuit was dismissed as a condition of the June 20, 1997 historic settlement between the attorneys general of 40 states and the tobacco industry. Dr. Wigand has received numerous awards and public recognition for his action in revealing tobacco company research and marketing practices, and he continues his efforts to reduce teen tobacco use through a nonprofit organization he formed, Smoke Free Kids, Inc. I give you Dr. Jeffrey Wigand.
Wow. The number 13, I don't know if that's auspicious or not. I generally spend most of my working days in 4th and 5th grade classrooms trying to give our children the opportunity to make better, more critical decisions and analytical decisions about a product that is designed and when used as intended takes the lives of 460,000 Americans. And when we want to talk about weapons of mass destruction, takes the lives of 5.1 million people in the world today. It starts as a disease with children. It doesn't start by an adult making a cognitive, rational decision about how tobacco will affect their lives. And so my efforts are directed towards children and keeping them as a target of the industry, much more literate and much more competent. For 90% of those who smoke today started well before the age of 18. The average age in this country is 12 and a half to 13 years old, and more girls are lighting up than ever before. Based on the myth of having a cigarette rather than the sweet will help you manage your weight. This industry that spends $10 billion a year that continues to perpetuate a product they know has intense consequences in terms of health and well-being. Nicotine is 5 times more addictive than cocaine or heroin. It's a product that generates between 4,000 to 8,000 toxic components. It's a product that, if it continues to go as it is, will by the year 2020 consume a Holocaust per year. 10 million people dying of a preventable cause of death. I'm going to talk about things that come out of Aristotle tonight. Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, John Rawls and the theory of justice. We're going to talk about morality. And the morality is if you create harm or knowingly create harm for profit, are you moral? In fact, I'm going to give you an example of several. I'm going to give you my first-hand witnessing and participation as a senior executive of the world's second largest tobacco company, how they operate it. And I'm going to shift gears towards the end to how Philip Morris operates today. I know intimately how Brown & Williamson work, and I know intimately how all the tobacco companies work. From studying their documents, I'll give you the references of 33 million pages of documents you can choose to read and understand how this obfuscation, this fraud was perpetuated for decades upon decades. We'll be led to believe tonight, by simply changing your name, you will become moral. You will gain ethos. And I'm quite certain to tell you tonight that leopard spots will never change. And I'll give you examples of it that are current. Whether it's on a fire-safe cigarette, it's on the issue of ETS, or it's on sworn statements of the CEO of the company that today have not yet to be reflected in the operational practice of the company. We are to believe tonight that by changing your name, you now follow the Kantian principle of the moral imperative. You do no harm, as John Stuart Mill would say, to another. Yet we're going to think, or led to believe, that now we transition from amoral, immoral, to now being moral and ethos with a name change. My experience in the tobacco industry began in 1988, when I was recruited by a headhunter, as I had so many times during 25 years of senior management experience in basically Fortune 10 pharmaceutical diagnostic companies. The hook to change from pharmaceuticals and diagnostics to join the tobacco industry was to apply my 25 years of experience of using science for the search for truth, using science to make lives better and healthier, and to use science to improve life. I believe that the 6 months interviews with both Brown & Williamson senior executives and BAT senior executives, that I would be able to use my scientific expertise to change a product that was, when used as intended, kills, i.e. make a safer cigarette. I can't take you through all 4 years and 3 months in a company, but I will give you a snapshot of the attitude, the behavior, the morality, or the amorality. And I will ask you to make a judgment. And should you choose not to believe how I paint the picture or the tapestry, I urge you to read the documents. Documents that were reluctantly produced by the tobacco industry in the litigation between the states and the industry. We'll talk about light and mild cigarettes, how secondhand smoke kills 55,000 people out of 460,000 people who choose not to smoke. The continued spending of $10 billion, the continued targeting of our children, the continued targeting of children overseas. How additives are used to facilitate addiction. And when opportunity is presented to exercise duty of care, they choose profits and sales over duty to care and the moral approach. And I'll take you through a number of them. I have several documents with me tonight that fortify and support and corroborate what I'm going to say. These are internal documents from the industry. I have taken them off the internet, and some of them are most recent is 2 weeks ago. And I will share them with you also. Anyway, I joined the tobacco industry in December of 1988. The hook was I would make a safer cigarette. A cigarette that was less toxicologically burdensome, and for those who choose to smoke. And to use the pharmacological techniques I had used for so many times to change nicotine's addictive quality. I was also hired for management experience in changing an organization. I got the opportunity to move my family at the time, which consisted of a 2-year-old daughter and a 2-month-old daughter from New York City area to rural Kentucky where their grandparents lived. I was also paid hefty. My annual salary was in excess of $300,000, which was a significant boost to me. I have been traditionally making in companies like Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer and Merck about $200,000 a year. I also got the opportunity to get my daughter, who was born with spina bifida, extensive health care coverage. So when I looked at the package, I said, Jess, could I change science of tobacco? Yes. Could you make less carbon monoxide, less nail polish remover? Could you change nicotine's addictive quality, less cardiovascular consequences? Some of that stuff was done in research. Some of it was done in many of the companies. Victor DeNoble of Philip Morris in the early 80s knew the relationship between nicotine and modifying nicotine and fortifying nicotine. We also knew that if you take nicotine out of a cigarette, would people smoke it? Could you make a cigarette fire safe? Could you change the natural intrinsic capacity of a natural incendiary device and save 1,200 lives a year by making a fire safe cigarette? Could you change the way ETS affects people? And how ETS kills those who are innocent and choose not to smoke? So I left the pharmaceutical industry and I joined B&W. And I spent 4 years and 3 months watching things that I had never saw go on in my professional career as a senior executive in many of the Fortune 10 companies. I must say that for part of it, I did not have the knowledge I needed to know what to do with what you know. What is the moral responsibility of knowledge? My interest was protecting my family, even though I saw things that were greatly disturbing to me. I ultimately got fired from the company over a particular additive. I had waxed and waned over the months and years and watched things like smuggling tobacco seed out of the country in a cigarette pack, only to be excused as that's a subsidiary of the company, it's legally all right. Or taking documents from a research meeting that clearly enunciated the internal mantra of the company, that cigarettes were addictive. If you hook them young, you hook them for life. And having a document edited, audited, and vetted by attorneys. 14 pages of scientific meeting minutes were altered to 2.5 pages of vanilla because the company did not want to have a document that was discoverable in a court of law. The attorneys used the privilege, which called attorney-client privilege, which changes the way a document can be presented in a court of law. I watched it happen in November of 1988. We talked about how to make a safer cigarette. How do you take and reduce secondhand smoke's toll? How do you deal with fire-safe cigarettes? How do you use genetic engineering to change the nicotine content of a cigarette? And many other things. We clearly enunciated the verbiage, the understanding that I had before joining the company, that reflected by the Surgeon General, National Institutes of Health, CDC, and virtually every public health scientific agency in this country and abroad. It was clearly a daily discussion that nicotine was addictive and nicotine caused the exposure to negative baggage. We're in the nicotine delivery business, and tar is the negative baggage. I watched a lawyer being ordered by the CEO and COO of the company to change the minutes of the meeting. It took 14 pages and created 2.5 pages of vanilla. Then I watched the chairman of the BAT industry, Sir Patrick Shee, be alarmed that the scientists may create documents that would be embarrassing or controversial in a court of law. We were summoned to a meeting in January of 1990 to New York City, where the lawyers from BAT, from each of the affiliate subsidiaries, and we were told that a lawyer would be put in every facet of scientific research. There would be caution in writing seminars so you wouldn't use the words that would be in controversy. Science that was generated overseas would be kept overseas or vetted by an attorney in the United States before it become a permanent document. Documents that were too controversial were kept overseas, away from discovery and litigation in the U.S. So in January of 1990, I didn't know what to do. I had a daughter that was ill. I needed health care coverage. I became quite comfortable with the salary I was making. And I chose to look the other way when they canceled the Safer Cigarette Project. And I went on looking at different issues. Until August of 1992, when my own children, who were going to private schools were coming home and asking, Dad, how can you kill people with your job? And I didn't quite know how to respond to that. I didn't know how quite to respond when I looked in the mirror and didn't like what I saw. I didn't know what to do with what I knew and the responsibility that comes with knowledge. And I got an issue over an additive. The industry uses 599 chemical additives that they say are GRAS approved. That means they come under the CFR 21, the Food and Drug Cosmetic Act of 1936, which basically say these additives have been used for so long, and food and cosmetics, that they're generally recognized as safe. Well, one of the additives happened to be a chemical compound called coumarin, to be distinguished from coumadin. Coumarin is an additive that had been extracted from tonka beans and been used by the industry for many, many, many years as an additive in cigarettes and pipe tobacco. Coumarin, in 1953, through an FDA hearing, was ruled to be toxic. In 1954, it was banned by the FDA for use in foodstuff. The tobacco industry, in spite of knowing that it had been banned in food, continued to use it in tobacco products, both cigarettes and in pipe tobacco. The company that I work for continued to use it in pipe tobacco in spite of removing it in 1982 from its cigarette products. 28 years after it was shown to be intrinsically human toxic. Coumarin was used until the day I left the company in March of 1993. Coumarin was shown to be hepatotoxic in dogs. Philip Morris continued to use it until 1976. Others in 1982, and Brown and Williamson until 1993 or later. In spite of knowing its toxic nature and being touted that the additives that they use to manipulate the flavor of cigarettes, enhance the delivery of nicotine, were GRAS listed, conveying a safety index. GRAS was meant to be approved for products that were pyrolyzed or burned and changed content. Many chemicals that are added for cigarettes, like glycerol, when burned, turns into a carcinogenic, a tumorigenic substance called acrolein. So tobacco that is free of additives is less toxic by the standard NTP protocol versus tobacco products that do have additives. Well, in August of 1992, I was faced with a dilemma. The National Toxicology Program had evaluated coumarin again. And they said coumarin was a lung-specific carcinogen in laboratory animals when tested according to NTP protocol. I had many run-ins with Mr. Sandifer over many issues, forcing people to smoke tainted cigarettes, smuggling seed out of the country, changing documents, failing to resolve things that were technically solvable that would actually change the exposures to those who chose to smoke or continue to smoke. In August of 1992, coumarin was a lung-specific carcinogen as defined by NTP. It had continued to be used in the company's product called Sir Walter Raleigh aromatic pipe tobacco. I got to them saying, man, I had numerous problems with. I said, it's got to come out. It's the duty of care. You're putting people in additional harm's way. Basically told me to go back to the lab and find a substitute. That they weren't going to take it out because it would affect sales and profits. Creating harm is all right for sales and profits. And I guess that was where the rubber hit the road. I no longer could hold my tongue, and I got in another debate with Mr. Sandifer. Shortly later, Mr. Sandifer became the new CEO of Brown & Williamson, and one of the first things he did was summarily fire me. Something I probably should have done well before that. And all I wanted in March of 1993 was go away, go back to where I came from. I wanted my severance package, which was contractually due me, and I wanted particularly my health care benefits for my one daughter. And that's all I wanted. Again, the duty to knowledge and the moral responsibility that goes with that was not on my radar screen. I didn't realize what I needed to do. All I wanted was the severance package, and go back to where I belong and sweep under the carpet 4 years and 3 months of lawyer obfuscation, putting people at risk, targeting, manipulating additives, etc. First thing Brown & Williamson said is they went on to their contract. I said, well, hell, you're going to honor your contract. In fact, I'm going to get me a Kentucky lawyer, and I'm going to sue you. And I spent 3 months from March to June of 1993 trying to get a lawyer in the state of Kentucky to represent me to sue the tobacco industry under contract law. I couldn't do it. They wouldn't come near me. I was radioactive. In June, I got an agreement. 2 years severance, 2 years health care benefits. And anyway, what? I was a fat cat. I was done. It was over. September of 1993, in an ex parte hearing in a Kentucky court, Brown & Williamson sued me for allegedly violating my fiduciary responsibility as a corporate officer by telling somebody my salary. They stopped my health care benefits. They stopped my salary and offered me a more draconian type secrecy agreement, which basically said whatever I knew, they owned. If I was asked any information of what I knew, I'd have to seek out their lawyers first, and they had a right to have a lawyer present during any and all conversations. And I immediately signed it. And the lawsuit was dropped. Again, in December of 1993, I'm still a fat cat. I have my money, I have my family, I have the health care benefits, and I don't have my duty. What is my duty with knowledge? Is there a moral obligation with knowledge? Now I'm laden with an onerous agreement by any standard. It was to protect the company from what I knew. And lawyers actually participated in developing that agreement. January 1994, things start changing. In 1994, I have my first interaction with the media. And the media happens to be CBS 60 Minutes. CBS 60 Minutes had received a parcel of documents from the world's largest producer of tobacco products, Philip Morris. And these documents were documents that reflected their research and development efforts on a fire-safe cigarette. And the fire-safe cigarette, as I told you before, is a cigarette that causes a natural incendiary device that causes a fire when carelessly dropped or put on flammable material or fire or dry material. And I was asked by CBS 60 Minutes if I would look at the documents, and I told CBS 60 Minutes that, yes, I can look at the documents as long as you don't ask me about Brown and Williamson. I don't tell you anything about Brown and Williamson, and that my technical expertise is in the reviewing of the documents. These documents covered a period of 1954 through June of 1986. June of 1986, Philip Morris developed and tested against their leading brand a cigarette that did not create fires. It was no more toxicologically burdensome. It cost the same. It looked the same. And actually, it smoked the same. And it was shelved because there was no regulatory authority that required the duty of care. And it was shelved. What was particularly irksome about this is I sat across from many of these folks in the Oakley joint venture meetings in the law firm of Covington and Burling. And during the 4 years of the joint venture meetings, Philip Morris continued to assert that it was impossible to develop a fire-safe cigarette. It was the responsibility of the bedding people, the furniture people, the rug people. And it wasn't their responsibility, even though they could do it. They would keep it shelved until such legislation passed, and they were forced to do the right thing, the morally right thing. Well, that bothered me. And it bothered me significantly. And ultimately that became, I was paid $12,600 for roughly 6 days' work. That will ultimately come back to haunt me. And I started building a relationship with 60 Minutes. Also, as you know, in early 1994, the FDA and a pediatrician that was leading the FDA, David Kessler, was investigating the opportunity or the jurisdiction that the FDA would have in regulating nicotine and regulating advertising. Also, U.S. Congress was cranking up. And U.S. Congress was asking me if I could help them understand the right questions to ask the 7 CEOs. And I told Henry Waxman and Sinar and Wigand that, yes, I'll help Congress if and only if you give me a subpoena. And if you give me a subpoena, an instrument of law, I can be able to tell you what. Well, part of my agreement that I signed in December 1993 was that if I was contacted by anybody, I would have to tell the company. And I told the company. Subsequent to telling the company in February of 1994 that I was contacted by Congress, my children were recipients of 2 death threats that basically said, if I did anything against the tobacco industry, they wouldn't focus on me, they would focus on my 2 children. It required the FBI to trap and trace my phones. They isolated the 2 phone calls. One phone call came from a hospital, one came from a phone adjacent to the B&W tower. From that day forward, I never told B&W what I was doing. In April 1994, the 7 CEOs, including my boss, got up in front of Congress. They raised their right hand to swear to tell the truth. The truth about whether nicotine was addictive, whether they smuggled tobacco seed out of the country, did they target minorities, was there a health risk to tobacco? Things that they knew. My boss, as well as the 6 other CEOs, said nicotine wasn't addictive. Smoking was no more dangerous than eating Twinkies. And as that indelible image replayed itself in my mind that day, I realized that by my silence, I would be just as guilty as those on my screen. And I chose to do something different in May of 1994. I covertly started working with the FDA, helping them understand ammonia technology, genetic engineering, and navigating through the plethora of documents that they started receiving about how the tobacco industry knew in 1954 nicotine was addictive, how they knew in 1961 that secondhand smoke was just as dangerous, what they knew about light cigarettes, and we'll get to that shortly, and why light cigarettes were intrinsically designed to give elasticity and compensation and carry the moniker of safety, just like we find on Kraft cheese. Light cheese, health risk, or avoidance of health risk. If you have light cigarettes, they're just for taste, not communicating a moniker that light means less risk, less exposure. That also became the jurisdictional document that the U.S. Supreme Court viewed in 2000 and said this is a maiming, killing product. The U.S. Congress needs to regulate it in a different way. We'll hear more about how the industry wants to be regulated shortly. Well, I also got involved in an ABC Philip Morris litigation as an expert witness. ABC aired a program on day one that said nicotine was addictive and that the industry spiked their cigarettes. They were sued for $10 billion, and I became the expert for ABC and the law firm of Wilmer Cutler Perry, and I got to see many other things. And again, that ultimately ended in August of 1995 with an apology from ABC News, with us concomitant with Disney buying ABC. It's the first time First Amendment issues and freedom of speech and press were usurped by the industry. The next one by CBS is much more egregious. In 1995, many other documents were making their way out. The documents that were making it out became a book called The Cigarette Papers. And I got involved in looking at and authenticating documents that I now see for the first time. These happen to be reams and reams of documents that were purloined by a paralegal working for Brown & Williamson. Many of the documents I asked to see when I was there at the company, now I see for the first time. And during this period of time, from 1993 through 1995, I developed a trusted relationship with the media. I helped many people in the media navigate through the documents coming out, whether it be at the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the LA Times, Washington Post, and on and on. But I also developed a special relationship with CBS 60 Minutes. I knew that CBS 60 Minutes would be able to get the truth out to 30 to 40 million people in a given evening. And so on August 5th of 1995, I decided to set my moral compass straight. My moral compass was like compromise. I had knowledge that could have public health and safety implications. And if one reads McIntyre and understands the hierarchy of loyalties, one should not be bound to a loyalty in which harm is being created. And that my loyalty to an agreement that was extorted on my child's health care benefits should not bind me when there's public health and safety issues. And so I went forward with 60 Minutes on August 5th, telling what I knew. It became part of the movie The Insider, which I guess all of you have seen, and I forgot to show the clip. But we can see it later if you choose. And I did it with 2 caveats. One caveat is I needed to have a lawyer before CBS aired the program. They agreed to it in writing. Second is that they would provide physical protection for my family once it was aired. And they agreed to both. And I went forward. Well, lots of things were happening at CBS 60 Minutes at that time. Lowe's Corporation Its chief executive officer happened to be one of the CEOs at the April 1994 congressional hearing. He was being asked to understand how and if he committed perjury or obstructed justice. CBS was now also in a process of being acquired by Westinghouse. And many people in CBS had an opportunity to make a significant amount of income by having an unfettered balance sheet. The very people within CBS also were trying to debate whether or not the interview they had with me and how they get the truth out and what they would do. Also at the same time, Lorillard Tobacco Company, which was also owned by Lowe's, was negotiated with my ex-employer for a $100 million transfer of product. Some way, CBS and Brown & Williamson's attorneys learned of the interview, and they threatened CBS with a $15 billion lawsuit based on a legal principle called tortious interference, which means the media had extracted information, which they do all the time, and that by extracting the information from me or that I volunteered, they would be subject to lawsuit. CBS did the right thing, of course. It stuck by its guns to show the truth and honor the commitment of journalism to truth. They canceled the program in October of 1995, and I was notified by the head of, the correspondent in 60 Minutes that it was canceled. I had by that time got a lawyer, Dickie Scruggs from Mississippi. I had not made the transition out of Louisville, Kentucky to another job. I was teaching high school at the time. Someone managed to leak the transcript of the 60 Minutes interview to the New York Post, and all hell broke loose. I was immediately sued again ex parte in a Kentucky court. My First Amendment rights were now taken from me. I was not allowed to speak to any other than my lawyer, and I was enjoined from talking about anything that I knew about the tobacco industry. I also received from the U.S. Department of Justice in November of 1995 a CID investigative demand on fire-safe cigarettes. Venue, Pascagoula, Mississippi. Mississippi, if you don't know, is the first state that chose to sue the tobacco industry under a novel approach that the state didn't buy into the sicknesses created by smoking and started to sue the tobacco, which ultimately led to 39 states and all the states suing. While in Mississippi and going down, I stopped teaching school at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I got on Dickie Scruggs' private plane, and I flew to Pascagoula, Mississippi. And when I stayed at Dickie's home that night with Attorney General Mike Moore, a U.S. attorney, Ron Motley, another attorney I had, before I could stay at the home with the Attorney General, they had to screen the home for listening devices because now the tobacco industry had started listening in on conversations of lawyers attempting to sue the tobacco industry and bring them to the bar of justice. It was also patrolled all night long by armed Mississippi state troopers because of the threats against Motley, against myself, even the Attorney General of Mississippi. And so that was the setting the night before the CID and the night before honoring the Mississippi subpoena that I received. If you haven't read the Mississippi deposition, you ought to read it. It's on my website as well as many other websites. It was 4 hours of threatening objections with 2 minutes of testimony. And that's an overstatement. That day, while I was giving the federal CID, Brown & Williamson went to a Mississippi Supreme Court and tried to block it. This is the same testimony now under oath that I gave voluntarily to 60 Minutes on August 5th. And they tried to block it. The Mississippi Supreme Court said, no, you can't block it, but we'll seal it. That means we'll keep it secret. They also went back to the same judge in Kentucky and got a standing contempt order. Should I go forward with honoring the Mississippi subpoena, I would be immediately incarcerated when I went back to the state of Kentucky. Well, I didn't really know that was going on when I was giving the CID to the Department of Justice. I learned it when I sat down with the Attorney General, Mike Moore, Dickie Scruggs, Ron Motley, and the U.S. Attorney. So if I was to go forward with the testimony, the deposition, civil deposition, I would most likely go back to Kentucky and face incarceration. It was scared the hell out of me. I had not by now become the favorite son in Kentucky. I had 2 bodyguards supplied by CBS 60 Minutes, ex-Secret Service agents. They were armed daily. They opened my mail. They started my car. They took my girls to Girl Scouts. Ultimately, the school I was teaching in, because of the threats against my life, had to post a sheriff's deputy on my classroom door so I could teach. To those people in that time, I owe an incredible debt of gratitude. For I didn't have the 153 children I was teaching every day. I'm not so sure I had the glue to stay together. My own personal physician told me, sorry, can't help you anymore. And I became a social outcast. Well, anyway, the deposition went forward in the afternoon because I felt that A, that I'm already paying the price, and B, if I didn't go forward today or that day at that moment, I would never have been able to go forward because I've been tied up in the legal quagmire for decades. This is an industry, by the way, that spends $1 billion a year in outside legal fees. $1 billion a year. So I went forward. Deposition went on. I went back to Kentucky that night. I was met by federal marshals. I did not get incarcerated. I went back to teaching school the next day. And so in November of 1995, what I told CBS 60 Minutes on August 5th, now I told under oath. It was sealed. January 1996 rolls around, and the media rolls in again. The deposition that was sealed in Mississippi made its way to the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal, again being threatened by Brown and Williamson, should they air or publish the interview, they would also be sued for tortious interference. Well, to the credit of the Wall Street Journal, they said, stuff it. They put it on the front page, and they loaded it up on the internet. And away they went. Everything that was given on August 5th now, they made it into the public. Also in January of 1996, Brown and Williamson, with their attorneys and public relation firm, spent $8.2 million creating a 500-page dossier to attack me in public opinion. To my credit, and I never lived the life of an angel, and to the credit of the people at the Wall Street Journal, who took that dossier and debugged it as a smear campaign. I wasn't so fortunate in Louisville, Kentucky, where the Post and Courier published every slur and every innuendo. I also received in January of 1996, with 2 armed ex-Secret Service agents, a bullet in my mailbox, which basically said, if I continue on the pathway, they will find my children wherever they are. February 1996 rolls around, and CBS airs now the original program that they interviewed on August 5th. And away we go. 1996 was fun. The judge in Kentucky gave him unfettered depositions. The judge threatened to put my attorneys in jail for protecting my rights until, again, the intercession of a U.S. Department of Justice attorney. And things kept on rolling out until June 20th of 1997, when 39 attorney generals had got the tobacco industry to wave the flag of truce, that they would pay $368 billion to the states for past flagrant and targeting and fraud, etc., etc. They would also release all their documents that had been kept secret from the public that could have helped the public health authorities in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s. That they would agree to FDA regulation, not on the terms that they choose, but on the terms in which the FDA would choose to regulate nicotine, the additives, the product marketing. And the last thing on the agenda was dropping the lawsuit against me. I spent 13 days in deposition with 2 attorneys against 50. In many cases, I thought we outgunned them. It ends at the last minute, at the 11th hour, when the 39 attorney generals tell the tobacco industry, unless you drop the lawsuit against Wigand, we will sue you each and every state. And at the 11th hour, at the 11th minute, Brown and Williamson chooses to drop the lawsuit. And since June 20th of 1997, I've been free to speak my piece. My piece is the following. This is a product that kills. This is a product that people make money from and kills. They knew it in the 60s. They knew it in the 40s. And to profit from somebody else's illness, is it moral or amoral? And do they do the same thing today? And I use amoral and immoral in the same kind. Should I profit from somebody else's demise? Do I violate the categorical imperative? Do I violate John Stuart Mill's principle of harm? Do I violate John Rawls' theory of justice? And should this allowed to be The many things that have happened since 1997. In 1998, the tobacco industry has paid out $206 billion to states for past misdeeds. And there have been numerous lawsuits that have gone on. Lawsuits that deal with it, secondhand smoke, which have been unsuccessful. Some class action on mild and light, which just was reported last week. We are asked today to believe that by changing the name changes the behavior. We are to believe today that when you change the name from Philip Morris to a nondiscrete, amorphous name like Altria, and categorize it as a consumer packaging goods company, that this leopard spots now have changed. And I want to show you that the leopard spots have not changed at all. I want to take you to a study that was conducted by Philip Morris in conjunction with A.D. Little in Czechoslovakia in 1999, which basically showed there's a cost-effective, this allowing to people to smoke. For every Czech that dies from smoking, $1,227 would be saved. It was a study that was to be put out in Slovakia, Poland, and many other Eastern Bloc countries. A study that proves that smoking saves money by killing people early. It saves on retirement, and it saves on health care expenditures. That's the company that's now trying to tell us that Altria is a new and improved company. That's because the PR folks have said that there's a fay of the goodwill and the good feeling ads that say, well, the good deeds of feeding some hungry and setting up battered shelters and donation to the arts, by the way, where the money comes from. It surely doesn't come from hot dogs, cookies, or Kraft cheese slices. It is financed principally through the profits that's generated, where a product that takes takes pennies to make and dollars and lives. It's a cost the American public $100 billion in health care costs and $140 billion in productivity. More money has been spent in that PR campaign, over $100 million, trying to demonize and change the taint of what this industry has done for decades. Now we're asked to believe by changing the name, which will allow stock to be more appreciable. We're asked to believe that this new name carries with it an ethos of altus, high, altruistic. No. This company is the same as it was before, and by changing the name does not give it a new ethos or a new morality. It is just the same. What should Altria do to prove its sincerity? Well, I have a list of things to do. One thing I like to ask and pose at the beginning is, has the company followed what its ex-CEO said? And I have to take a little bit from what was said in a deposition in the Florida litigation by Jeffrey Bible, who was the CEO of Philip Morris. Mr. Bible, under oath, was asked what he would do should the product that his company makes cause lung cancer. And he said, as soon as the science showed that it causes lung cancer, I would shut them down. I don't know whether that was for PR or honesty. I must tell you that if you look at the Philip Morris website in 2003, there's no reflection of Mr. Bible's statement under oath. And things continued on. I want to ask, does Altria and Philip Morris believe the 86 Surgeon General's report on secondhand smoke? Does Philip Morris believe that smoking causes cancer and disease? And what they should do with that information? Having a fire safe cigarette would save that. Perfect timing, folks.
Ladies and gentlemen, we ask you please to step out of the auditorium. We ask you to go out as you're looking at the back of the auditorium to your left, out the door, and straight up the ramp. No, sir, not that way, Michael. Out the door as you're looking back to the back of the auditorium to your left, out the double doors to your left, and straight up the ramp. Helen, let's go ahead and work you out of the building, please.
Okay.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As soon as you're back in, I'm assuming we can proceed.
Is it conspiracy? Never happened before. It's the 13th, isn't it? The 13th.
And thank you very much for your patience. Dr. Wigand.
The 13th anniversary, 3/31/03, I don't know. Wow. Conspiracy theories, I don't know. Well, what does the tobacco industry, and in particular Altria and Philip Morris, need to do, since they have about 50% of the market? And I have some things. First and foremost, they need to deal with the truth. The absolute truth. Something that they haven't done well for at least 6 decades. And the truth, if you read Sullivan's book, is depriving people of a responsibility and the outcome. They have chosen to use obfuscation, deceit, and the lack of truth for decades. Number 2 is they need some choice in people and the outcomes. Because without the truth, you can't exercise responsibility. Without responsibility with the truth, that is asking somebody to believe something you don't believe yourself, you've chosen the different outcome. Remove the light and mild monikers from tobacco products that mislead. If you can have light craft cheese, it's because it's less calories, less fattening, there's less tar, less nicotine. Truly what happens in light and mild cigarettes. Believe and buy in to the 86 Surgeon General's report, the Registry of Carcinogens, the International Agency on Research on Cancer, the National Institutes of Health, the Surgeon General's report of 2001, and the CDC MMWR report of April of 2002, which says that secondhand smoke kills and provide smoke-free environments and support legislation that allows those who choose not to smoke to have a safe workplace and a safe environment to eat. Produce fire-safe cigarettes and quit lobbying against the legislation in New York and in Massachusetts that will save 1,200 lives and the single largest cause of property loss in this country. Don't keep on lobbying the FDA to get their way of regulating. Let the regulation process regulate this product as it is. Addictive and killing. Develop environmentally sensitive products, like filters that don't clog the water systems by using something else other than cellulose acetate that's non-biodegradable. Stop targeting the children overseas in economically developing countries and poor countries. Change the graphics of their packaging like Canada did to represent what truly happens with tobacco products and save some lives. If they truly believe that now they're more responsible, they need to ascribe to the principles of Aristotle and Kant and Hume and John Stuart Mill and not create harm when they know harm is being created in a product they know, when used as intended, kills. I'm going to stop there because I promised Jerry that I would not let the fire alarm go off again. And I welcome the debate. I have documents with me. In 1999, the film was made of the secrets, not secrets, but The Insider. It was the end of a vindication process that had taken how this industry will use its power to intimidate the media and the press. I had nothing to do with the movie. I received nothing from the movie. And it's a tribute to the many people who gave much to make this journey possible today. Without the children in the school and the principal and the lawyers and people that I'll never know who they are, made this journey possible. If truly we're going to move forward in a new era, we need to reduce harm. Thank you.
Our panelists to join us up here on the stage.
Can I speak standing up?
Sure you can. If you're more comfortable. Yeah. And let me do some introductions here, first of all.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Michael. I will.
Thank you.
Oh, you're entirely welcome. Actually, the order of speakers will go a little bit differently, okay?
Okay.
All right, let's see now. Let's start down at the end. Work on the far left. We have Myron Levin. Myron has been a reporter for 30 years, mostly with the LA Times, where he remains as a staff writer. He began covering the tobacco industry long before its political and legal strategies were widely recognized as an important story. Concerned about a lack of coverage of the issue, he competed for and won an Alicia Patterson Foundation Fellowship to do research on the industry in 1987. He has been writing about the tobacco company since then with an emphasis on anti-tobacco litigation. He also wrote a number of articles on the battle between Jeffrey Wigand and Brown and Williamson and on the filming of The Insider. Welcome, Myron. It's great to have you here tonight. Next, we have Mark Berlin sitting next to Myron. Mark is Associate General Counsel, Corporate Affairs Law of the Altria Corporate Services, Inc. Mark currently serves as Associate General Counsel, Corporate Affairs Law at Altria. In this position, he acts as counsel to the Altria Group Corporate Affairs organizations, specializing in government affairs, communications, and regulatory issues. Mark joined the company in 1996 as Assistant General Counsel for Worldwide Regulatory Affairs and was later appointed Senior Assistant General Counsel for Worldwide Regulatory Affairs. Previously, Mark held the position of General Counsel of Gemini Consulting, Cap Gemini America, a computer and management consultancy from 1990 to 1996. He was an associate at Cleary Gottlieb Steen and Hamilton from 1987 to 1990. Mark received a BA from Tufts University and a JD from Cornell Law School, and he resides in South Salem, New York. Welcome, Mark. And of course then, flipping the pages here. I don't want to get anything wrong about your bio. Geez, you'll kill me tomorrow. Let's see here. Too many bios, too many people here. Okay. Excellent. There you are. Michael. Yes. Michael Cody received his PhD in communications from Michigan State in 1978. He's published extensively in the areas of interpersonal social influence campaigns and power and compliance. He has authored or co-authored 5 books and more than 50 publications in communication and psychology journals. His most recent grants involve training adult learners to use new technologies, studying family influences on health beliefs and health change, and tracking the tobacco industry's marketing strategies online and offline. Several lines of research span over 2 decades and have culminated in conferences, panel discussions, and books. His research on power and compliance dates to the early 1980s, when he organized a number of panel discussions and programs concerning topics such as the psychology of tactical communication, gender, power in communication, and interpersonal relationships, and communications theory. Welcome, Professor Michael Cody. And Mike, when you speak, it would be great if you could elaborate a little bit more in terms of your work specifically in tobacco.
Right now?
No, in a second. Just in a second. In a second. And that's everybody. And I'm going to ask Mark to come up and speak first.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I greatly appreciate your having me here and giving me the opportunity to hear Dr. Wigand's presentation and to participate in this panel discussion. As legislative counsel to the Altria family of companies, which includes Kraft Foods as well as Philip Morris USA and Philip Morris International, and I do want to point out that they are still called Philip Morris. The tobacco companies have not changed their names. I've had ample occasion in the past few years to consider many of the issues that Dr. Wigand has addressed and to reflect more generally about the so-called tobacco wars and how those confrontations have been impacted by the media. Our companies are trying, however fitfully, to learn from the events of the past and to move forward in a constructive way that will result in something that our country still sorely lacks, a coherent national tobacco policy which offers solutions to many of the very real issues that remain of genuine concern to consumers, to the public health community, and to the industry. We're convinced that there is more common ground here than many people assume, and that, for reasons I'll try to explain, it would truly be of benefit to all stakeholders, both in the industry and among tobacco control advocates, if we could try to work together to find those solutions. The very title of this symposium, as well as the media's continued use today of the phrase tobacco wars, reflects, I believe, our tendency as Americans towards dramatization and simplification, and our love of diametrically opposed conflict with easily cast heroes and villains. And there's no question that there was, in fact, a substantial amount of genuine conflict in the past. It's equally true that today, just as there is no single monolith named Big Tobacco that moves in lockstep on every issue, it's no longer the case that a tobacco company, for its own business reasons, cannot and does not share many of the public health community's most cherished goals. We certainly played a major part in creating the adversarial atmosphere in which most questions of tobacco policy in this country are still debated today, and our public reputation suffered grievously as a result. Philip Morris did oppose most proposals for increased regulation of the industry throughout the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, and pursued an aggressive, combative approach towards many of the basic health-related issues that Dr. Wigand mentioned that arise from the sale and marketing of tobacco products. Our companies didn't see much need to engage with its stakeholders or its critics. In fact, as recently as 1999, we didn't even have a website. As a result, we failed to stay in step with societal expectations and lost the trust of the American public. And when at last we began to realize that, we began to try to change. For example, our tobacco companies adopted a policy of agreeing with the medical and scientific communities that cigarette smoking is addictive and causes lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and other fatal diseases in smokers. If you go to their websites, you'll find an array of links to the public health community sites, information about quitting, and other information from a public health perspective. Another example of our changing approach is our emergence from what we call the bunker, our rediscovery of the need to engage with all of our stakeholders, including those that disagree with us. I can tell you that my participation here today, which would have been unthinkable a few years ago, represents an entirely different mindset for what had become known in some circles as the no-comment company. Perhaps the most visible change in the past years has been the dramatic curtailing of cigarette advertising in the U.S. as a result of the state settlement agreements from 1997 and 1998. Cigarette advertising had been banned from television and radio since around 1970, but there was still a fair amount of general mass market materials that were accessible by the general public, including children. There isn't anymore, because companies that participate in the settlements don't advertise on billboards, don't advertise on buses or subways, don't place their products in movies, and are expressly prohibited in consent decrees that are enforceable in every state by the state attorney general from undertaking any marketing activity, even if not expressly prohibited, that targets minors. There is no other consumer product subject to comparable marketing restrictions. But to us, the settlements, though a hugely important milestone, do not signal an end to the need for a change in the regulatory environment for tobacco products. Those in the public health community who point out the irony that cigarettes remain the only product that consumers ingest into their bodies but is not regulated as to content by the federal government are absolutely right. That's one reason that Philip Morris USA is the only tobacco company, not Brown & Williamson, not Lorillard. Philip Morris USA is supporting the enactment of new legislation that would give effective, meaningful authority to the FDA to regulate the manufacture, sale, and distribution of tobacco products. Strong new regulation would provide clear rules for all tobacco companies to follow and would be enforced uniformly against everyone so that all industry participants have to follow the same high standards of responsibility. We think that the legislation should cover the entire range of tobacco regulatory issues, including all of the ones that Dr. Wigand mentioned, from health warnings to performance standards, from good manufacturing practices to what the Institute of Medicine has called potentially reduced exposure products, to descriptors such as light, low tar, and ultralight. What do we think FDA's mission should be? To build on existing efforts to prevent kids from smoking, number one, and also to reduce the overall harm caused by tobacco products to all consumers within a framework that preserves adults' ability to make their own decisions about whether to use them. And this is decidedly not a U.S.-only issue. Philip Morris International is supporting the same regulatory principles in every country that it does business, and our companies are actively supporting the adoption of a global framework convention for tobacco control comparable to the one that is now being finalized under the auspices of the World Health Organization. Going beyond FDA and product regulation, there is a gigantic new area where additional rules are urgently needed in this business. Measures to disrupt, reduce, and ultimately eliminate the increasingly alarming growth in this country of smuggled and counterfeit cigarettes. As one unintended consequence of the unprecedented wave of excise tax increases that have occurred in recent years, illegal cigarette sales have exploded across the country. The illicit cigarette trade hurts everybody except the smugglers, some of whom have even been convicted of using the profits to fund international terrorism. First and foremost, tax evasion, counterfeit product, internet sales, and other illegal activity is costing governments at all levels billions of dollars annually in lost revenue and settlement payments, money that could otherwise be used, as we think the settlement funds should be, to prevent youth smoking and for other public health initiatives. Your own Board of Equalization has estimated that California is losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year because of this activity. Second, for those who believe that minors are more price sensitive than adults, contraband product drives down prices and consequently undercuts the public health rationale for tax increases. Third, illegal activities have a variety of impacts on consumers. And finally, as has been demonstrated amply by Altria's recent earnings announcements, contraband activity has serious negative consequences for legitimate businesses that try to play by the rules and obey the law. All of which, for me, raises the question of whether it really makes sense from society's perspective for it to be okay in this country, on the one hand, for adults to smoke, and large majorities of Americans remain opposed to prohibition, while at the same time automatically subjecting to vilification and demonization any company that tries to responsibly sell cigarettes to those same adults. our tobacco companies believe that there is a strong business case to seek additional regulation that addresses societal concerns. By the same token, I'd ask you to consider which is better from a public health and policy perspective. A cigarette market legitimately supplied by companies that have learned at least some lessons from their past, that employ thousands of Americans, that make their settlement payments and pay their taxes, that spend money on research and development, and that are willing to accept new regulation to both pursue harm reduction and add predictability to their businesses. Or, on the other hand, an increasingly chaotic cigarette market dominated by counterfeiters, smugglers, and foreign companies that have no concern about their public reputation, pay no taxes, don't participate in the settlements, and, by definition, will evade and avoid any additional regulations at all cost because it is only by such evasions that they exist in the first place. Once again, I'm sincerely grateful for your courtesy in hearing me out tonight and listening to my comments, and I look forward to participating in the discussion and answering any questions that anybody wants to ask. Thanks.
And now Professor Michael Cody. Mike, do you want to come up here?
I want to make some comments in the 7 minutes that I have time for about what's happened since 1998, the settlement agreement, and how the tobacco industry in general, and plus lots of other people not associated with the corporates, but other people who profit immensely from selling tobacco online and other places. For many reasons, tobacco continues to be presented to people as the normal thing to do. When you grow up, you smoke. And it's still being presented as something that's fun, that's rebellious people use. It's used by thin people, it's used by cool people, and things of this nature. And some of this is quite legal and to the immense profits of the tobacco industries. What is not regulated was going back to 1998, it was a pivotal time when the Attorney General signed the agreement, and there was an agreement about what the tobacco industries cannot and can do. One thing that's not regulated is the internet. And if anyone surfs the internet, you see that there's literally thousands of tobacco-related websites. The corporate websites are squeaky clean. They offer lots of information one way or the other way. There are a lot of pro-smoking, anti-smoking, and things of this nature. Separate from that, there's an incredible world out there on the internet of sites, places that are selling tobacco and selling them cheap and selling them gray products. These are Indian reservations in New Mexico and Texas and the state of New York. Your internet filtering programs do not block these sites, and you can buy tobacco, cartons of tobacco with a money order, not proving what your age is and things of this nature. And this is a real travesty. No one wants to regulate the internet, but something must be done here. We did a study of 300 and some odd of these sites. Half of them are commerce sites that you can just click, and another of then you can buy instantly and without proof of age. Another half of these websites are what we call image lifestyles. They're promoting cigarettes as sexy, and I really do mean nude women carrying balloons smoking, and all sorts of various other sorts of things. They are arousing for all those young boys and girls are out there surfing the internet. You see forbidden things, and your pornography blocking sites won't block these up because it's sort of soft porn. They just show nudity, but these are, what they do show is thin females smoking. It's glamorized. They're showing people in leisure activities. And when we did our study, which ended a year ago, only 11% of these sites carried any health warnings. Get this, right? On billboards, all print materials, you'll see health warnings. Only 11% of websites that feature tobacco have warnings. So the industry, the attorneys generals talked with the tobacco industry about limiting the internet back, but it was dropped out of the final agreement that was signed in 1998. Another agency, another market segment that's tapped by tobacco industry and other people besides the corporates themselves is NASCAR. you know from 1998 settlement agreement that the tobacco industry was pulled out of tennis and golf tournaments and stuff of this nature. They still are actively involved with rodeo and NASCAR. And the claim was made, NASCAR is for older people over the age of 18. They go there. They've been funding NASCAR, Winston Cup in Copenhagen since the 60s, so it shouldn't be regulated. So it was not in the agreement in 1998. A year and a half later, the president or the CEO, whatever it was, of NASCAR said, NASCAR is a wholesome family event. Bring your kids on down. Let them wear a Marlboro jacket and cup and hat and all those sorts of things. And over the course since 1998, various companies, not only tobacco but other ones, it's the popular thing. There's millions and millions of dollars spent and propping up NASCAR, which of course, if some parents take their kids to NASCAR, they're seeing a 2.5 hour commercial for Marlboro, Winston, and all the other tobacco companies. And the literature would indicate that people who have a more positive attitude toward the company and the brand logo and have their products, their screensavers and stuff of this nature, they're more likely to end up smoking later on. Also, rodeo was unregulated. There's regulations in the size of signs and stuff that they could use, but not these other ones. It's hard for, then the third one, besides internet, NASCAR, rodeo, the third one would be placement of smoking in movies and things of this nature. It's hard to prove that someone got paid. We have documents from the Minnesota documents that Sean Connery got gemstones for advocating smoking in his movies. Sylvester Stallone got money, I think, from Brown and Williamson. And there was a memo, classic memo, they were complaining about not getting their money's worth from his placement of tobacco. The recent analysis we saw this last week indicates that many movies, including Disney movies, feature lots of tobacco use. And these are all attempts to normalize smoking, make it appear like this is what everyone else is doing, just like in the 50s when 50-some-odd% of the population smoked, and you saw Lucy Arnaz and all these people smoking on TV. The next thing that's under the radar that we don't really see, it's not regulated, is bar nights. And yes, my team and I went to bar nights all over LA County, and these are Camel nights and Marlboro nights. And you show up there, and there is a nice, attractive female, usually braless, who is, taking your photo ID and things of this nature and your address. And they've created, over the course of a year and a half, an incredible, awesome direct marketing profile of everybody who smokes. And this is to send people coupons. It's to send them messages and things of this nature. And I just want to, I know 7 minutes is already over. I just want to point out to Jeffrey that your old employee has one of the best websites. You log on to the Brown Williamson tobacco sales site and you register there and buy your carton every Monday mailed to you. You might be able to skip out on the taxes in the state of California. You're obligated to pay those taxes, by the way. You're supposed to declare them here and pay those taxes. And in summation, my research here from the tobacco grant in the last 3 years we had from the state of California indicates that on the internet, in NASCAR, there's a strong presence of tobacco, trying to normalize it, trying to say, when you grow up, this is what people do. It is sexy, fun, it is linked to the life of leisure. You could download screensavers and images on the internet, and you know that lots of kids are doing this.
Cody. And now Myron Levin of the LA Times.
Well, I'm sort of intimidated. It's hard to follow all of those. But the advantage for you is I definitely will not go beyond my 7 minutes. I'm just curious, first of all, how many people here smoke? All right, that's good. How many used to smoke? She's probably right. They're all lying. They all still smoke. A little war story, not nearly as exciting or harrowing as the ones that Jeff related. But I got interested in covering tobacco in around 1986 because nobody else was doing it. pretty much. And it made it a lot more fun than it is today. And I got lucky kind of early on in that I found some channels to get some documents out of the Tobacco Institute, which is an organization that no longer exists, but it was a lobbying arm based in Washington of the tobacco companies. It was abolished actually as part of that 1998, November 98 settlement that's been mentioned so many times. But in any case, I was able to write some pretty nice stories out of this, and I thought, this isn't hard, you know. I mean, you can penetrate this fortress industry, but it really was hard. It turned out it really was hard, and one thing that I began to wonder about after a while, trying to learn more about the tobacco companies and write about the various strategies that they had, was where were the whistleblowers? I mean, you have this giant industry with thousands, tens of thousands of employees, and over all that time, somebody must have been indignant enough or felt abused enough personally for whatever reason to come forward, and either through commanding loyalty or fear or some combination of these things, there was kind of nobody. There was nobody out there. There's a man named Michael Perchik. He was a Senate aide back in the 1960s when the first warning label legislation was written for cigarettes, and later was the chairman of the Federal Trade Commission under President Carter. After that, an advocate for various causes, including anti-smoking. And he and I had some conversations about this, and I said, where are all these guys? I mean, there have to be people inside the tobacco industry who, you know, for some combination of sort of anger, guilt, or a personal sense of being overlooked or mistreated or whatever would come out, and sort of nobody ever did. And then there were two very important things that happened. And Jeffrey mentioned the paralegal for Brown & Williamson, who was involved in a sort of document review project for Brown & Williamson law firm in Louisville, and began taking documents home, sticking them under his coat and so on. The security was not very good. And there was a sort of a massive document dump of these Brown & Williamson documents on Congress in '94, right at the time the executives went and gave their testimony under oath about not believing smoking was addictive. And boom, there landed documents there from Brown & Williamson, but also from their parent, British American Tobacco, where they're talking about the addictive properties of tobacco in the early 1960s, and in fact saying, this is sort of a good drug in a way because it helps people concentrate and focus on what they're doing, and is there any way that we can talk about this, you know, to burnish our image and to say we're selling something useful without getting in trouble by saying it's addictive. I mean, that went all the way back to the early 60s. So that happened, and that was sort of monumental in terms of information coming out of the industry that it really didn't want to impart, and people coming forward. And then the following year, I didn't know who Jeffrey Wigand was. That is, his name wasn't one I had heard, but I'd heard that there was a vice president of Brown & Williamson who had left the company. I didn't understand the circumstances, and who was talking to CBS. I was extremely excited. I found a phone. I don't think we ever talked about this, but I found a phone number for Jeffrey in Louisville, and I called him up one night. We'd never spoken. I think it was about maybe 6 months before the CBS thing finally aired, and naturally he was in a stressed condition, because here he had agreed to come forward and be part of this broadcast, being in some legal peril for having done so, and now he was still in legal peril, but he wasn't going to get his story out, it appeared. He was not very receptive to talking to a strange voice on the other end of the phone, and I never did really get to speak to him at any length until after the 60 Minutes piece came out. But anyway, that's my little war story. And I know, gee, I must be coming on to 7 minutes. I better be careful here and keep my word. One of the interesting things that Mark Berlin talked about is Philip Morris being a company that's learned the lessons of the past. And one of the interesting things was that when this litigation settlement with the states happened, it was widely, but wrongly, very wrongly assumed that the legal problems for the industry, while not really over, would abate. And that the major legal threat to them had been these lawsuits that the state attorneys general had filed, and that to the degree that other cases remained against them or might be filed against them, they would be able to use the accommodation they were making. They were eliminating billboards and doing all these things they'd never been willing to do to limit the damage, to win cases or at least limit the damages against them. And I don't know whether it's karma or what it is. Maybe if they had taken this step a few years earlier and admitted a few things, they might have been spared some of the misery they're going through now. I mean, if any of you have been following these stories in the newspaper, well, with a war, there's hardly anything else in the newspaper. But Philip Morris just lost a $10 billion verdict in Illinois, and the type of case that it is, a class action lawsuit involving people that smoked light cigarettes and, according to the claim, were deceived into believing that this meant they would be safer. There's at least 10 more of these pending around the country. And so it's true, and references to the website. You could go on the website and order cigarettes. I mean, on the Brian Williamson website, that may not be good. But if you go on these websites of the major manufacturers, I mean, one of the things you're kind of struck by is that some of the statements made there about addictiveness and about the health hazards of smoking, while maybe not identical, are not that far from maybe what the Surgeon General says now. I mean, it's just night and day from what they were saying a few years ago. But the trouble is, they get into court. I mean, the trouble for them is they get into court and they kind of bring this up to mitigate the anger of jurors and so on. And the plaintiff lawyers say, well, that's great, except my client had been smoking 35 years and was addicted and just diagnosed with lung cancer at the time that you decided to make this admission. So whether, it is going to really help them, I mean, partly you could say that it is a addictive product, and so there's always going to be a market for cigarettes. There'll always be people that smoke, but you also do wonder how the major companies are going to survive this legal onslaught. I mean, I think that's the major story going forward. So that's it.
Why don't we go straight to questions, since it's a little bit late. I've been told, by the way, that the fire alarm was indeed caused by the caterers, so we can blame the food for the fire alarm. Let's go straight to questions from the audience, and we'll see how that goes, and we'll see how much time we take with that. Over here.
A bill has just been introduced in the California legislature, AB 210, by Assemblyman Joe Nation, which would permit apartment owners to have a smoking or a non-smoking building, their choice. Philip Morris has declared opposition to this bill. Can you tell us why? Because they've always been in favor of choice in the past.
Would that be directed to me? Yeah. I think I'm familiar with the specific bill you're talking about, and I think what it would do is there's two components to it. Number one, it would create a new nuisance lawsuit, just what certainly my company and everyone needs. Nuisance lawsuits. All neighbors could sue each other's neighbors if there's smoke wafting from one apartment to another apartment. And then what it would do in about 4 or 5 years after that is make most multifamily dwellings smoke-free, banning smoking inside people's apartments. People can have different views about this. That is what the bill does. And what it does is, for affluent people who can afford their own houses, they can smoke inside their homes. But if you live in an apartment building, you can't necessarily smoke unless your landlord declares it to be a smoking building. And we just think that goes too far. Are we the ones leading the opposition against it? No, I don't think so. There's always got to be a balance struck in these things. Whether a wafting odor of smoke is going to hurt someone or not, people can be the judge of that if it goes from apartment to apartment. But the fact is, if we start regulating people's behavior inside their private homes, we think there's a lot of people who think that goes too far. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm one of the people who was forced to sell my condo because I have asthma caused by 40 years of breathing secondhand smoke in the workplace and home. I breathe any tobacco smoke at all. I live in a severe asthma attack. My lungs were ruined by living in a condo with a smoker below whose smoke wafted, I hate that word, invaded my home. I was forced to move because right now the law supports them. How do you suggest resolving the problem?
I think it's absolutely fine if a landlord, and I think our company would say, if co-op owners, if landlords want to get together and put smoke-free buildings together, there's a huge market for that. There's clearly a market for that in this state where you have 80-90% people who don't smoke. To legislate it and say that people cannot smoke in their own homes, no matter whether they want to or not, we just think goes too far. I'm not trying to create an argument about it. If it passes in this state, and that's what the people of California want, that's what they're going to get. I would take a little bit of issue with the characterization that Philip Morris is leading the charge. We are pretty much stepping back and have been for a few years in lobbying public place smoking restriction issues. It's not really our issue. It's not our business. The restaurant owners and the bar owners lost that battle here in California several years ago with whatever law or proposition it was. And we think that it's up to each state, each community to decide what they want to do on that.
Over there. Chris.
Mr. Wigand, you have heard now Mr. Levin's response. I'm sure you've heard it before and others that Philip Morris has said. Do you buy what he's saying and what the position of Philip Morris is all about? And do you actually think that there can be a state that eventually we could come to between industry and the various social efforts afoot, that there could be this common ground that he speaks of?
Well, I think six decades of past performance kind of label the leopard the way it is. I'm not quite sure by changing the name it changes the ethos. If one ascribes to the harm principle and you produce a product that creates harm, do you not have a duty to protect that harm to others? And I think Philip Morris, as well as others, have a chance and an opportunity to change the dynamic of what's going on today by taking positive steps with the knowledge they've known for decades that they chose not to share with the public when they had an opportunity to share it. Secondhand smoke, by Philip Morris's own documents, was known in 1961 to be harmful. Philip Morris could solve that problem if they want the leadership to go out and help communities, states, be smoke-free for those who choose not to have a workplace that's contaminated with somebody else's smoke. If you choose to smoke and it's your right to smoke, I agree, if you're an adult. You have also a right to drink if you're the right age. But you have no right to get behind a wheel of a car after drinking and cause harm. Secondhand smoke harms and has been attributed to 55,000 lives lost by people who choose not to smoke by either going into a workplace where there's a human carcinogen exposure or to a restaurant. So I think if they're going to choose to be a different company, they ought to help foster the fire-safe cigarette laws and not obfuscate the law in New York State by saying they're not familiar with the ASTM standard that they participated in and asking for a delay in the enactment. So I think they should change that. I think if they wanted in the Lights and Mild case in Minnesota not Minnesota, but in Illinois where they lost, and there's a $10 billion judgment, they're telling people that they're not going to be able to pay the settlement money out if they have to post a $12 billion bond. And they're asking to be treated different than everybody else as a defendant to be treated. Okay. And there are many things they can do to demonstrate that the 6 decades of past misbehavior is not part of it. So they have some positive steps. I think what they need to do is take these steps. Quit forcing issues and the lack of smoke-free environments. Bring forward the fire-safe cigarette. Change the way the labeling is on the product, irrespective of what the FDA does now, and take the lead. That would, to me, demonstrate that there's a new ethos in the company. I don't see it yet.
Mark, do you want to follow
up? I guess I would just say briefly, because I know a lot of people have questions. Philip Morris USA has brought fire-resistant cigarettes to market in the past few years. Philip Morris is actively petitioning the FTC to issue regulations that would either regulate or ban the use of descriptors, lights or ultralights. We are supporting specific legislation in Congress that would give FDA full, total authority to decide what it wants to do about ingredients, smoke constituents, fire-safe issues, and all the other things that you spoke about. So I'm not up here saying that we're perfect or we're 10% there or 40% of the way there. There's a long way to go, but we are trying very much to do things differently.
There's a question back there. Front. Who has a hand up? Felix.
I'd like to ask Professor Cody, some of us who work in ethnic media and with minority journalism associations detected an upswing in advertising and marketing designated to particularly black and Hispanics in the 1980s and 1990s, and funding of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. It's suspicion, but you've looked at a lot of documents. Did you find any evidence that there's been targeting of these markets as the tobacco companies may have been pulling back from other markets?
Yeah, the tobacco industry is one of the best industries ever in terms of marketing, starting from day one with the baseball cards. The tobacco industry was the first to do baseball cards, so they've been the leaders of this all along. The real threat here is to the black-owned newspapers in the South, which have become heavily dependent on tobacco, on advertising from these companies. And at the same time, we have uncovered documents in Minnesota Depository that a number of companies, especially Hispanic, have been funded by tobacco companies so that they would have their leadership conference, so they'd be given awards where some of these people from the tobacco industry said to Hispanic audience members, "We smokers are discriminated just like you Hispanic people," and drawing parallels between smokers being discriminated against just like people of color. We also have documents where they gave money to the Mexican Grocers Association in New York City and fully expected these people to rally around and block ordinances in the city of New York and the state of New York. We also looked up a number of documents about philanthropy, and this is of course before 1998. A lot of documents about philanthropy where they talked about the fact that their attitude towards philanthropy was that after they gave money to people, those people owed them. That's why Billie Jean King joined the board of directors after taking so much money. They were the ones that supported female tennis, and she joined on the board later on. There's a lot of reciprocity from the donations to Hispanics and African Americans with the tobacco company. A lot, extensive.
Mark, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I guess I would say, first of all, obviously, as I've been trying to reiterate, when you go back to baseball cards and things like that, most of the, if not all of the marketing practices that have been of concern for decades are not prevalent anymore after the settlement. And in terms of the tobacco companies, or Kraft for that matter, marketing to all demographic groups, they do so, and I would say that they would be the first to tell you that they do so. I think that they would not agree with the kind of paternalistic view that an African American or a Hispanic or a Mexican American is less able to deal with advertising than a white man or a white woman. And so I think the companies, they're in the consumer products business, and for better or worse, and there's a very legitimate viewpoint that I think has been expressed here tonight, that even our company share to some degree, that tobacco marketing, because it's so deadly, because it's so addictive, needs to be curtailed. But to the extent there's any marketing at all to adult smokers, the company's going to market to all demographic groups.
I want to make a comment about that, because when we were doing all this work, we did 3 years of extensive work, and I went to a number of the African American websites, and the BET network has as one of its sponsors Kraft. And so we're all suspicious, and so I joined Kraft. But I have to say all I do is get a recipe every 2 weeks. And there's nothing, no ingredients or tobacco or like that. It's just very straightforward. BT, Kraft, they want to reach the African American market, and doing so that way is
1,000 uses for Cheese Whiz.
If I could just make an editorial, I mean, Craft really, and the whole food industry, is kind of next in the sights of the plaintiff's lawyer, the whole issue of marketing food products to kids. And there's no way Kraft is going to be able to say they don't market to kids. I mean, my kids, every cartoon show they turn on every Saturday, it's nothing but Kraft. That's going to be an issue going forward, and Kraft is trying to deal with that as well.
Well, to this day, we do see, when we did one of our projects was going around town, and you'll still see all the menthol ads are in Crenshaw and African American communities, because they started targeting menthols to blacks in the 60s, and they had the jazz concerts and movie nights, and they really got in in a big way with the African American communities in the 60s, and that goes back quite a long ways.
We have a question over here, the young gentleman in the white shirt.
It's more of a comment, and one of the ways you tell whether an industry, a company has changed is by the quality of their arguments. And I'm afraid I'm going to parrot back the argument from the representative from the tobacco industry. You won't like the way I parrot it, but here it is. Whenever an industry produces a dangerous product that faces stiff competition by unregulated members, then the regulated producer of the dangerous product is to be preferred. That's truly outrageous, because the proper conclusion is that neither one of them are legitimate. I mean, I'm supposed to choose between and say that, why should I believe, really? It's like saying the oxymoron, we're responsible killers. There is no credibility. You know, because, see, the quality of the arguments now we've heard, we're good guys, we're changed, but you still come back with these very, very clever arguments, and you got to be quick to pick up on them, because if you don't, it's the same bogus argument over and over again. You may choose to respond or not. To be honest, I don't care.
Well, may I?
Please.
Okay.
Please do.
I think what you're saying, sir, is that you think that cigarettes shouldn't be sold at all, that they should be prohibited.
That's right.
And that's obviously.
Don't call it freedom of choice. You can do that.
Why do we let him finish?
If that's what a state or a country or the world eventually decides, that's what's going to happen. But that's not the way it is right now. We do a lot of polling on it. The Gallup organization does a lot of polling. 75 to 80% of Americans, I don't think 75 to 80% of Californians, but of Americans across the whole country do not believe that tobacco should be banned, don't want the black markets that would arise from that, don't want their states to give up the dependence on the revenue from what is, after all, the 9th biggest industry in the country. So do I have a personal problem if Americans change their mind and say, or does my company, if there's prohibition, it's a law-abiding company. They're not going to sell the product anymore. But it can't be simultaneously the case that we want the product to be sold, we want it to be supplied, but whoever does it, whatever company does it, is automatically a criminal.
Another response would be we have a system that is addicted to a particular kind of income. And I understand that. The question is, from a societal, systemic point of view, how we would get rid of that dependency, because it's an addictive system.
I agree with you.
I understand that. I understand, because it's very clever. We've so insinuated it into our economy. Now we throw it out and we become vulnerable. Well, hell, we're vulnerable, but that's no argument for the continuation of slavery or any other evil.
But you're leaving out the fact, which is that most Americans, knowing how deadly and addictive the products are, still want them to be available. So until we get past that point, I don't know how it's going to be different.
Question. I'm sorry, we have to take a question back there.
Is it Mark?
Yes, sir.
Sorry. You mentioned you had children. I was just wondering, if they began smoking, what would your reaction be, and what would you say to them?
If they began smoking...
Oh, perhaps they already smoke. I don't know. I was just...
If they began smoking as children, they would be in big trouble.
How about when they turn 18?
I would tell them that I don't think they're doing a very smart thing. But it would be up to them. Now, do you think an adult should be able to decide at age 19, 20, 21 that they're going to smoke or not?
Yes, I do. I was just curious what your opinion would be.
Well, I stopped smoking when I was about 22. I'm glad I did. I would be upset if my kids started smoking, because it's really bad for you.
We have a question over here.
Hi, this is from Mark. And first of all, I think it's great that you're here and answering all these questions. We need to get you on the mic so that
Once again, thank you all for being here. But I hear you constantly saying that you support things such as the FDA regulation of ingredients. And what confuses me a little bit, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, is I don't understand why you're waiting for that. I don't understand why the company itself, Philip Morris, wouldn't take the initiative and start trying to find less harmful ingredients to put in cigarettes without waiting for the FDA to regulate such a thing.
Okay, that's an excellent question. And there's two answers. Number one, the company is trying to do a range of things, from putting new messages and legends on its lights products that say what you get depends on how you smoke, to address the issue of compensation that Dr. Wigand raised, to doing extensive research, hundreds of millions of dollars of research on potentially less harmful cigarettes. If we just put out our annual report last week, it says that later this year we're going to be coming out with a product that could reduce the carcinogens to smokers. You know what the problem is, though? Without regulation, and people have done a very effective job, and I agree with the part that Dr. Wigand has played in this. Without regulation, without the government substantiating the claims that our scientists and our company is going to make, nobody is going to believe it. Nobody's going to believe it. We're going to be attacked for it. We're going to be accused, as we were in this lights case that Myron mentioned, of defrauding people for making false claims. If this is not done in partnership with the government, all we're going to wind up with is a big stack of new lawsuits. The government has a responsibility here. FDA regulates every other product that people ingest, like I said, and it should apply equally to the deadliest consumer product that exists. We can't be on our own. We're trying, but it's not going to work if any company tries by itself.
Actually, I have a question for Myron, since we don't want you to doze off down there. We've got to have a question for you. I'm curious, since many of the students here are public relations students, what are you seeing, what shifts are you seeing, if any, in the public relations strategies, the media relations strategies of the various tobacco companies or the industry as a whole? What have you seen taking place over the last 3 to 5 years, if anything?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that in interviews or in any kind of exchange, they tend to acknowledge the harm of the product much more readily than before. I mean, even going back 5 years, there were some sort of acknowledgments, but very often the word claimed or alleged would creep in, where people would be saying, well, we've long acknowledged the claimed risks of our products. So this was a way of distancing themselves from an opinion that many other people had. That doesn't happen anymore. I think the way Mark is speaking of it as being a dangerous product is typical. As far as accessibility I think some of the companies, at least, and maybe Philip Morris more than the others, sort of really wants to be out there and wants to be part of stories and this sort of thing. I mean, I think it's a very defensive. I mean, the industry's in a much more defensive and vulnerable position than it was when I started getting involved in this. It was very much more high and mighty then. I mean, it's still an industry with a tremendous cash flow and large profits and all that sort of thing. But it wasn't reviled in the way that it is today. And so I think that I think perhaps more responsive and more available than in the past, if that makes any sense.
Indeed it does. Questions? Here? That's Cecilia Wilkinson.
It is. Yeah. I'm not so certain if this is a question or a statement, but I do have to say, and what Altria is doing is a very interesting beginning point that I think a lot of other companies, and Mark, you alluded to this, started years ago in different industries. If you look at ARCO, I don't even know if ARCO exists any longer, but at one point in time, ARCO was lauded as a fabulously socially responsible company long before maybe not long before, but clearly at a time when the petroleum companies were trying to fight the issue of smog and what gasoline caused. And ARCO took steps, created safer less polluting gasoline, but was lauded in the public relations agency and the communications agency for being out in front. I think Budweiser has been lauded for being out in front of safe driving campaigns and campaigns to make certain that underage adults do not drink. And I'm just wondering if maybe one of the things that needs to be studied 10 years from now or 20 years from now or 40 years from now is how Altria and if there are other responsible tobacco companies are treated because they've finally gotten on the bandwagon, forced, granted, as all of the other companies were forced to act more responsibly. I just think it's an interesting thing that we're only picking on tobacco, and I would curious from the press standpoint what you think of this.
Well, first of all, there are industries out there still that won't concede, that won't give an inch on any kind of regulation at all. The auto industry is one of them. They haven't had a comeuppance like these guys have, I would say. So they'll fight anything that's sensible or in terms of safety, for example, on the grounds that we'll take care of it. We're the engineers and we know how to do it. One thing in the dynamic here, and I don't know if Mark would agree with this, Philip Morris is the dominant cigarette company in this country. And one reason that some of its competitors sort of grouse a little bit about the very aggressive, proactive way they're trying to confront some of these regulatory challenges is, hey, you got a 50% market share. You got half the market to yourselves. And anything that goes further to regulate and hold things in place the way they are so that we can't be as aggressive in marketing and so on as we used to be, basically puts in cement the advantage that you have. And this is why people like R.J. Reynolds and Brown Williamson aren't so ready to join the parade here. And then, I think there's a legitimate debate about whether some of the steps that they're proposing maybe go far enough. The anti-smoking world is one that is, they wouldn't be caught dead admitting that anything a tobacco company said might have any merit, whether it did or not. That's just the truth now. Whether that's justified because they feel they were lied to for so many years or whatever. But there is an argument to be made that some of the regulatory proposals that Philip Morris have, sort of legitimize them more than they really improve public health. It's a debate about how far some of these things go.
Well, I'm going to inject myself here. If Philip Morris and Altria clearly understand the needs of the regulatory and the agencies are not moving fast enough, why, when they do not move forward with things that will work now that they know work, why not take 52% of the package of Marlboro and put the graphics on it like Canada that saves 3,000 lives? Are you not interested in saving the lives now? That you will wait till regulatory? Why not take that responsibility and take it forward if you truly want to be responsible? Why not continue or foster smoke-free environments throughout the country rather than obstruct them? Why not create fire-safe cigarettes on all your brands rather than just on Merit and Merit Lights? Why not put it on Marlboro, the single largest smoked cigarette in the United States? Why not just do it now? Why wait?
Let me try to take them in reverse order. Fire-resistant cigarettes. We are both ramping up production capability so that it could be applied to Marlboro, and at the same time advocating very strenuously in Congress for regulation by CPSC, which is what Congressman Moakley wanted, to impose regulatory standards on all cigarettes that would be made by everybody. Smoke-free environments.
Then why don't you let legislation go forward in New York that you've asked for delay? Why do you continue to delay the legislation, lobby the efforts in the Massachusetts fire-safe cigarette that will save lives now?
Dr. Wigand, I'm sorry. You've done in your presentation today a lot of times what people tend to do, which is switch back and forth between Brown and Williamson and the industry. You constantly interchange. It was not my company that asked for the delay in New York. It was R.J. Reynolds. We are ready to comply with that thing in New York as soon as it goes into effect. It is very difficult logistically to make one set of cigarettes for the New York market up to a certain standard and make different cigarettes for different states, but we are ready to do it, and we're going to comply as soon as that thing goes into effect. At the same time, we are seeking national standards so that we can make one fire-safe cigarette that the government agrees, not that we think, but that the government says is fire-safe. Smoke-free environments, we are supporting smoking restrictions everywhere. We don't agree with everyone totally. We don't support total bans, for example, in bars and restaurants, although you have them here in this state. We don't support that everywhere, but in terms of workplaces, offices, sporting arenas, all sorts of things, we are supporting. The first one you mentioned, health warning labels. Okay, we announced a policy in 1997, and we adhere to it to this day. Any warning label that the government wants us to put on, text, graphics, whatever they want, we will accept. What the plaintiffs' lawyers want, and the box they want to put us in, is to have us make up our own warning label so that they can then attack it as being inadequate. The congressionally mandated warning labels are what Congress has said is adequate. They can change it anytime they want, and we will support it.
Let's take one or two more questions from the audience. Sir.
Just to continue this line of questioning, so the real question becomes, will you agree to the phase out of nicotine in your tobacco products so that over time and without damage to existing smokers and without hurting the addicted, that we can eliminate this addiction in our country? Would you agree to the phase out of nicotine in your product?
The legislation that we're supporting nationally for FDA regulation would permit FDA to take out or reduce any harmful ingredient or smoke constituent in the product, including nicotine, whether it be fast or slow, phasing it out over time, so long as the product that they are left with is acceptable to adult smokers. Now
right, there it is.
Can I finish the answer?
Sure.
That clearly means reducing the level of nicotine. That's been done in Europe. It's been done in the Gulf states. There are plenty of countries around the world where they start reducing nicotine, and it works. It's ironic now because, as Dr. Wigand pointed out, the tar is widely thought to be, or at least contain most of the cancer-causing agents, and there's some facet of the public health community now that believes the right public health approach is to add extra nicotine in so that people will get their daily dose of nicotine and smoke fewer cigarettes per day rather than more cigarettes per day. But we are supporting actively legislation that would permit FDA to take out and reduce any harmful component or constituent over time.
One last question. Sir, you've been very persistent.
Yes, if I can have two very brief questions. One, Jeffrey Wigand, whether you still have any threats and harassment from the tobacco industry, such as you referred to. And the other one to Mark Berlind. You mentioned the dangers of a black market in the tobacco industry. I wondered what Altria's policy was on the current black market on a less dangerous and addictive drug, marijuana, and whether you had registered any brand names in anticipation of that drug being legalized.
And if so, is this a good time to buy stock?
You guys would like that, wouldn't you? I'll just answer that one very quickly. I don't think so. I'll check it out in New York, though.
Dr. Wigand?
I, from time to time, do have threats and do have police protection that is based on credible threat made through the police department or to a school I'm in. Recently, as in Georgia, I was in a 4th and 5th grade classroom where I went in the morning and there were police officers there waiting because somebody had made a credible threat. So it goes on from time to time. I also get lots of love mail.
And with that, thank you very much. Oh, folks, there's a reception upstairs, lots of good food. Let's enjoy it. And hopefully not set off the fire alarms again.